today's session, in the title, we put knowledge exchange, but actually we will be looking a bit wider onto knowledge exchange, outreach, and knowledge sharing, including training. And what do we mean by these terms? And this was actually something that we discussed when we prepared this session as well. So how are these terms different, or how do they overlap? So we will be coming back to this question as one of the first questions in our panel discussion. But I'm showing here just a little Mentimeter poll that we did at this year's collaboration workshop, when we had a room of people interested in the topic, and we're focusing on outreach and knowledge exchange. And as you can see, we asked the question, how are they the same or different? And basically the room did not agree. So they were kind of in agreement about the fact that they are two different things and not the same, but whether they are overlapping and how maybe one of is part of the other, they did not really find one answer. So, and we will be looking into this a bit more later on. But why are we talking about this? Why is this really important? And I really hate the word unprecedented, but I think at this point it is the word to use, because there's so much information out there, and everybody has access to so many information sources, where some are right or some are wrong, or maybe some are half right or wrong, or so, that people who are in a position to do or facilitate knowledge exchange, to do or facilitate training or outreach, or so, are in a really, really important place, but also have a lot of really hard decisions to make. The goals that generally are shared in any of these spaces is that we want to share relevant research with a wider community and public, especially also in outreach with the public, because if you look at it, basically the public funds the research we are doing, because the public is paying the taxes that funds the universities and the research institutes, so that pay our salary. But it's also about sharing good practices and things that work within our communities, and about upskilling the research community. And even if we are digital research professionals, we are part of the research community, even if we don't do the research ourselves in an academic sense. And then also we want to enable the synergy effects, and we want to make sure that not all the people are reinventing the wheel, or are doing the same things without being aware of that, but also can tell others, okay, this is working well, or this is not working at all. So that things that don't go as well are basically a taking of the usual things that you would do, and the bad practices also are basically taken out of what's the normal thing in the field. So I hope this is setting the scene somewhat. We will now go through a round of introductions a little bit, and then we will have about half an hour-ish or so with some set questions that we prepared previously. You can at that point already start putting some of your own questions into the Q&A, and then in the second half, we will be going through your questions. If at any point you feel that you really, really, really would like to ask a follow-up question to one of the questions that we are discussing, please, if you could raise your hand and then either ask your question in the chat if you don't want to speak up, or unmute yourself if you want to ask that question yourself. So I'll just briefly say who I am. So my name is Marianne Weinziel. I am a senior research software engineer at the Institute for Computing for Climate Science at the University of Cambridge. And I'm also one of the co-leads of the Computational Abilities Knowledge Exchange project. And I will be putting the link to that project into the chat a bit later on. Our panelists today are Debs Udo, Eamon Bell, Emma Caroon, Kirsty Pringle, and Toby Hodges. And the first question that I want to ask each of them is also to tell us about their background, their current position, and how they are involved in either or several of knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, outreach, or training. And I'll stop sharing so that you can actually see the people we've got on the panel, and I will just go through the list of people by trying to remember what my alphabetical order was. I think so let's just start with Debs. Can you just unmute and introduce yourself?
Yes, please, but not after I complain about the person who decided to make this in alphabetical order. Oh, well, I'm Deborah Udo, or just Debs. I'm a nurse, midwife, and public health practitioner residing and working in Nigeria. Yes, I have a shift right after this call. I'm here because, like my other panelists, I strongly believe in the power of openness by design and knowledge sharing. And I do this currently by serving as the founder and executive director of Precedes Research 101, which I will be plugging nonstop throughout this panel. I'm able to do this with Precedes because I'm drawing on my previous experience as a research software engineer for an organization, OLS. I'm also dedicated to capacity building and training. I'm also an SSI fellow. You probably can't see it, but I'm wearing my SSI t-shirt. And so as part of my fellowship project, I'm developing Precedes. And finally, I'm also a carpentries instructor, lesson developer, and governance committee member, which just means that I see Toby Hodges a lot in these calls. That would be me.
Thank you very much. Let's continue with Eamon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eamon Bell. For work, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at Durham University, which is in the northeast of England. There I work on the very broad area of the digital humanities. So I work on computer methods for humanists and for humanistic research questions. My background is actually in musicology, so history and theory of music, and I've come into computer science via interdisciplinary research in that area. In terms of knowledge exchange and so on, I'm responsible for a number of funded projects that have this as at least one of their main activities. One of them is called CCP-AHC. It's a new research software community for arts and humanities researchers. And I'm also involved in digital skills training for arts and humanities researchers from the doctoral level onward. And the last thing I would say as well, I'm also responsible for knowledge exchange informally as well within my workplace. So always happy to teach people even in the most kind of ad hoc settings, but also to pass information on in various different volunteer roles that I have in the university. So I just want to say it's possible to have it at all sorts of levels, whether you have a funded project or whether you're just getting started informally in the workplace. So very nice to see you all and do this, which is also a knowledge exchange, of course.
Thank you. Next is Emma.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emma Caroon. I work at the Alan Turing Institute, which is based in London in the UK. I'm a principal researcher as kind of half of my job, which is where I lead research projects, particularly meta science projects at the moment. So doing research about research, and I generally research about data science skills, roles, and kind of team science approaches. I'm focused at the moment on biomedical data science as a project. But my other hat is that I lead a team of research community managers, which are very much all about, I would say, knowledge exchange, although we actually do, I would say, all of the other types of knowledge knowledge giving, I suppose, knowledge sharing, training and outreach. So we're a team of 7 community managers. We work across different data science communities. And what we really try to do is sort of bridge the gap between the research team, so the research part of the community, with all of the other people who we have to work with. So that could be patients, it could be healthcare workers, it can also be people in government, people charities, so all different types of sectors we work with. And what we do try and achieve sort of by the end of the communities, or by trying to establish communities, is really going towards knowledge exchange. So by that, I mean this kind of 2-directional sharing of knowledge. And actually that can be quite hard to achieve when you're building new communities, which is what we actually generally do within our work. I suppose I should also say I'm also an SSI fellow, and I've got the lovely Turing Way is another community that I work with, and we've got our Turing Way book dash this week, so we're working on our knowledge exchange this week. So thanks very much, and lovely to be here.
Thank you, Emma. Kirsty, would you like to go next?
Hello, my name is Kirsty Pringle. I'm project manager for the Software Sustainability Institute. Before I joined the SSI, I was a researcher working with atmospheric and climate models. And then I kind of moved over onto like a more research software engineering role. Then I became project manager. So my kind of knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, outreach interests are, there's a couple of different, there's kind of 2 separate ones really. One is really around making sure that the research software engineering community, I work with a lot of communities, and making sure that knowledge can be shared where needed within that community. So I work a lot with green research software engineering. So this is a new field of software engineering, really focusing on the environmental impact of reducing and measuring the environmental impact of research software. So because it's quite a new topic, there's knowledge all throughout the community, but it's not really joined up necessarily very efficiently. So I do a lot of work about kind of, I don't necessarily have that knowledge. In fact, often I don't have the knowledge, but I do a lot of work trying to facilitate knowledge exchange between people that do have that skill and that knowledge, but don't necessarily know other people that have skill and that knowledge. So there's a bit of joining the dots in terms of that. So that's kind of really trying to upskill a community. And the other thing I do quite a lot of is I do a lot of public engagement and outreach. So this can be through citizen science, where you get people to collect data. You work with kind of the community to collect data, or it can be through public talks or public engagement projects where you're kind of trying to get your message out. So as Marion said, our funding is publicly funded, our research is publicly funded. So it's really important that we kind of pass on the information that we discover when we're doing research. So most of this is around air pollution, climate change, because it's easier to do that than research software, public engagement. But it's a way of going out there and speaking to the community, people that aren't in academia, and kind of making sure that you're getting your message out there as much as possible.
Thank you, Kirsty. And finally, Toby.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Toby Hodges. I'm Director of Curriculum at an organisation called the Carpentries, which is supporting a community of educators all over the world who teach software and data skills, primarily in the context of research, but the workshops that our community are teaching are targeted at a much wider range of people than only researchers. My background is molecular biology originally, and after that I moved into bioinformatics, computational biology, primarily looking at the analysis of genomic data. But then about 10 years ago, I took a kind of sidestep into a role where I became a scientific community manager. That took me to Germany, where I'm still based. I worked at a place called the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Heidelberg. And yeah, there I was doing this kind of community management. So I was working with a lot of people who were still doing this kind of computational biology and research and developing a lot of research software and so on, but I wasn't really doing that much myself. What I was doing a lot of was kind of community engagement, and in particular, building up a training program at MBOL. And it was really there that I started to understand the power that training workshops and other kinds of knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange activities can have in terms of building a coherent community in a place like a research institute or whatever. Then nearly 6 years ago now, I took this job with the Carpentries, having volunteered with them for a while before that. So as director of curriculum, I'm in the kind of the closest approximation, I suppose, is an open source program manager. So our lessons in the Carpentries are all open source projects, people collaborating together on those lessons on GitHub. And so what I do as the director of curriculum is largely, I'm leading this team called the curriculum team that supports the community's activities in terms of developing those open source lessons and maintaining them and so on. So I'm not doing a lot of that myself. What I'm trying to do mostly is help other people to do it. The lessons that the Carpentries community develops and maintains are about all kinds of topics relating to research software. And those individual community members do a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of outreach and exchange and so on in their communities, as well as delivering a bunch of training workshops as well, of course. So I support them in doing that. I also, one of the ways that I support that is by delivering quite a lot of training myself. I'll probably talk a bit more about some of those training activities later on. And yeah, in the past, I was more involved in some other kinds of knowledge exchange activities as well, but I have fewer opportunities to do that these days. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, excited to learn more from the other members of the panel as well today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I kind of see a bit of a theme here that there seems to be a strong connection between community building, community management, and knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing. So that might be an interesting part to look into as well. But let's stick first to the questions that we discussed. So the first question I want to ask each of you, and after that we'll go to a mode where we don't all answer all the questions, because otherwise we'll always take ages and everybody will repeat what the first person said. But how do you differentiate? So how do you define knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, outreach, and training, and where are the overlaps? Let's maybe go in just the order I see you on the screen, because maybe that's easier. But I'll start with Kirsty first.
Okay. I think we're going to touch on this a lot, that there's not an exact definition. I think the important thing to think about is some of these are two-way and some of them are one-way. So knowledge exchange is two-way. So you've got communication. Knowledge sharing is more one person telling someone else something, which doesn't make it less valid, but it just means it's one directional. And the other thing to think about is the audience. So something like outreach tends to be reaching out outside of an academic community. So you're not just sharing information between other researchers or between people within research adjacent roles. You're going out with that community. So I think the two things when you're thinking about what activity you want to do and whether you want to do it is what direction this is. Is it one way? Is it two way? Is it multi-way? And who your audience is. Is your audience other researchers? Is your audience people outside of research? And then you can start to unpick which term is appropriate to whatever you want to do. So I think I would kind of think of it that way first and then start digging into definitions.
Thank you, Kirsty. Emma, do you agree, or what would be your definition?
I was just going to say I totally agree with Kirsty. I think the only thing I would add, and this is from sort of a community, sort of building community perspective, perspective is that it is so often people are talking that like they're doing knowledge exchange, and actually most of the time they're not actually doing that. They're actually sharing knowledge. So that I agree with Kirsty with her definition of the two, that knowledge sharing is often one directional, knowledge exchange is two directions. And that usually I think is the main difference. It's like when you have a community of people who are more used to working together, you've built trust, you've got this kind of psychological safety within your community where people are really happy to share their experiences. That is usually where you get knowledge exchange happening, because people are comfortable to share their knowledge, their experience between members of the community. When you've got like fresh communities, or you're putting on things like training where you're getting people that you don't really know coming, it is often more about knowledge sharing. It isn't exclusively those two things, because as we're saying, they're kind of, there's a grey area, but in my experience that's generally the kind of two ends of the scale really. So you've got the people who are giving out knowledge in terms of knowledge sharing, and then you've got that exchange at the other end of this kind of more of in terms of like a collaboration going on at the knowledge exchange end. Yeah.
Thank you. Toby, what do you think? I mean, you're coming probably more from the training point of view. Is that sharing, exchange, something else?
Yeah, I mean, great answers already, and I broadly agree with what has already been said. What I will say that what I really like in both of those answers is that the focus has been much more on like what the outcomes are that you want to achieve, and I think that is a much more important thing for people to consider than like a strict categorization of whether what you are doing falls into each of these, like under each of these labels, I suppose. And I think one of the distinctions that I make between like training and outreach in particular is the goal really with outreach is much more to what you're hoping to get out of it is like increased engagement from people that you are reaching out to. Whereas if you're purely doing training, then your goal is to, as effectively as possible, give people the ability to do the thing that you're aiming to teach them to do, or give them a greater understanding of the thing you're aiming to teach them about, I think. And I mentioned in the introduction that that I saw in my previous role, and I keep seeing it in this role as well, the power that training workshops have as kind of community building activities as well. And so despite the fact that we do talk about our workshops as being training, one of the things that I think they're also really effective at is the kind of outreach sort of effect as well, that you can, by building a positive learning environment where people start to feel safe to admit things that they don't know and to ask questions and so on, you also foster that environment that Emma was talking about, where people feel more comfortable to start kind of sharing ideas, and you get more of this knowledge exchange going on as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. So things like training workshops, also hackathons, also are really good if you want to build a community. Deb, what are your thoughts? Anything to add?
Just double checking that you said Debs and not Bill. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I largely agree with what has been said already. I'm learning a lot. Really, knowledge sharing goes in one direction, like Kirsty and Emma have rightly pointed out, one direction. So to things like talks or documentations, mentoring sessions usually goes in that one direction. But for me, I think the slight difference between training and these other forms of knowledge exchange would be the focus on like a structured skill acquisition that you're trying to achieve. And so training could be considered things like workshops, tutorials, demos, or instructional videos. A good example would be the carpentries. I wasn't paid to say that. And knowledge exchange would be more reciprocal. It's kind of like you're transferring the knowledge, but also co-creating and adapting it through like dialogue and collaboration between different groups or individuals. And I really like the idea of knowledge exchange because it allows for a broader kind of collaboration. And then you bring people from different disciplines. You can have a software engineer and a nurse on the same call for whatever reason. And that's for me, I feel like knowledge exchange is where the real innovation actually happens.
Thank you. Eamon, you've got a more academic view, maybe.
Yeah, potentially. So, I mean, I really appreciate the focus that Kirsty brought on the kind of functional description, right? Like we should just be figuring out, you know, what as Toby said, outcomes, but also just what is the highest level description, how many people are involved, what's the nature of the flow of information, and so on. I would add another axis to analyze that, and I think it's about asymmetry. So a lot of the assumption is that, you know, there are people who know things over here, and then we translate or transfer that knowledge over there. And that could be bidirectional, or it could be unidirectional, and that might help us figure out what's going on in terms of the labels that we want to give it. But that is not the only way of thinking about how people create knowledge. As Deb said, co-creation is another mode, which is not, you can't collapse it entirely into transferring knowledge from one group to another group. It happens in group contexts, absolutely. And so I really think that there are other ways to think about knowledge exchange as well that don't rely on this transfer of ideas from brain A to group G. And I think co-production, co-design, participatory design are all other ways of doing that. Not to say that these have underwritten a lot of what other people have just talked about in the call as well. So it's not a gap, it's just a name or a label for activities that all of us have been doing, and another way to view it. And then the second thing I would say is, yeah, as an academic, and I think anyone who's attached to any form of institution, you may see these words being used to describe activities, and then you don't recognize them according to the definitions that we've given. So, for example, I work in a context where outreach, perhaps rightly, is understood to mean we go from higher education into secondary schools and primary schools to tell them about our work. That's great, but it's a very narrow definition of outreach, according to, if I'm listening carefully to what everyone else is saying. And why I bring that up, not because I think that's a bad kind of outreach, but don't feel like when you turn to your institutions or you look for support for what you're trying to do, if you see them using a different word than you'd like to do to describe the thing that you want to do, don't be put off about it. This way of thinking about it functionally might help you identify, actually, yes, this thing that I want to do is indeed outreach, but not because it's me going to a school to talk about my research or me widening access in some other way, but because I have some functional, collaborative, in that case, maybe asymmetric way of thinking about things. So I think thinking about it much more creatively, despite sometimes having quite rigid definitions in the workplaces that we inhabit, can be really, really useful. And I think everything that people have spoken about just now has given us tools to talk about whatever this activity is in a way that suits us, and to think about what outcomes we want rather than getting boxed in by the labels that we or other people want to give it. Yeah, so that's kind of my reflections on what we've just heard.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's probably a good start to think about these things. But as Eamon, as you said, don't let yourself be limited by thinking about these definitions, or try or think that you need to fit into that box to be allowed to do what you want to do. Okay, my next question would be a lot more practical, I hope, because there's there are so many things around that you attach those words to that we've been discussing. So there are hackathons, there are special interest groups, there are birds of a feather sessions, there are workshops, there are training courses, there are discussion groups, and on and on and on. So what do you think, maybe not what's the best, but what's your favorite format and setting to do knowledge exchange or knowledge sharing? So let's start with maybe Deborah. Do you want to talk about your favorite knowledge exchange or sharing activity?
Yes, please. Workshops. But for me, I think the one that works the most or that works best actually depends on the end goal of your knowledge exchange. So in my experience, I've seen that hackathons are better for innovations and like rapid learning where you need to create one thing. So like the R Dev Day, for instance, or the hackathons that we have at Collaborations Workshop. Please come to Collaborations Workshop. And whereas discussion groups are better for deep dives, reflections, and inclusive kind of thinking, but most times group discussions are a one-time thing where that happens and it's forgotten. Whereas the other alternative of mentorship programs allows like a more sustained knowledge transfer over a longer period of time. But I'd say in everything, personally, from my experience, I've found that cohort-based or like modular programs like the ones run by the carpentries or by Precedes, they are more powerful because they combine this structured learning with the community aspects and also allow you for peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. And I don't want to rain on the parade of people who like hackathons, but I kind of feel like hackathons might discourage certain groups of people who don't feel like they find their place in the hackathon. They struggle to find what role they can partake in, which is why I love workshops. Workshops are great. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Emma, what's your favorite setting, or what do you think works best?
So I was just gonna, because I knew like what Deb would talk about because I know her. So so I thought I would just go the other side and talk more about, because I think she was talking more about synchronous kind of knowledge exchange. So when you're like face to face, or face to face as in we are now online face to face. So I wanted to speak up for asynchronous methods of knowledge exchange. So things like using GitHub issues. GitHub now has discussions that you can have, discussions and knowledge exchange through those sorts of methods, using platforms like Slack, Teams. Don't really like Teams, but you know, some people do. Discord, all these other things that kind of can be used for knowledge exchange. So and I do think it's really important to remember that, you know, we are all working in communities, and actually we can plan events, but what do we do in between that for our knowledge exchange, our knowledge sharing? Well, it is using platforms. It's like asynchronous methods of communication, and actually those are great, and they're really great for things like Deb was saying, peer mentoring, building up relationships within communities. So yeah, so I think those kind of communications platforms are also really great for knowledge exchange.
Yeah, and even email.
Yes, email too, sorry. Yes, email also is the default for everybody, I feel.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Kirsty, what do you think?
Oh, it's just no. So no one's talked about like kind of special interest groups and communities of practice yet. So I'll do that one. So that's something I'm working with a lot with Green RSC community practice. So it's very much work in progress. So I can't say whether it's successful or not yet. But for all of these things, you need to think about obviously what you actually want to achieve. Like there's some quite short-term interventions, there's some much longer-term interventions, and like special interest group is a long-term intervention. You want it to last for a good few years because you want it to kind of essentially create experts, create leaders, create ambassadors within the community and connect those together. So it's a great one. It's a lot of fun because you're working with people that you kind of identify people that you feel have a lot of potential to make a change, that are on board, that want to, and it's very kind of, I really like the role of bringing people together. So, oh, you're interested in this, you're interested in that, bringing people together. It's quite satisfying. It is difficult to maintain momentum with something like that. You know, it's easy to run, well, it's not easy to run a workshop, but it's easier to run a workshop because you've got a particular date, you've got a set of stuff, and it fits nice within a funding cycle. You can say, I ran this workshop. Setting up a community or a community practice or a special interest group is longer term and is less tangible. It's harder to kind of understand what you're achieving. The impacts are, I think, because the impacts can happen quite a long time after the project starts, it's quite hard to kind of measure your impact. So it's a little bit of a tricky one, but I think when it works well, it can be really, really effective. And you know yourself when you're in a meeting and you just feel that you've brought the right people together and they're having this really great, fruitful conversation. And then they go on and have passed that knowledge on to their communities, is really satisfying. I think it can be very efficient, but it is quite hard to track in terms of impact. You're muted, Maren.
Oh, sorry, I was talking to myself then. Yeah, I was just saying thank you. I was thinking about a clever way to lead to the next question, which is that I was thinking, okay, these are all things that we are seeing a lot. So we see all these kind of formats in the conferences we go to, and especially if you're basically in one community, the same things are often repeated because that's what people know. That's when we say, okay, we want to create this event or we want to do outreach, then you go back to the things that you know, and you go back to what you've seen others doing, and so because that's what you feel comfortable in. I was wondering whether any of you, and I'm starting with Eamon because he's in the arts and humanities, and that's obviously a bit of a different community to what a lot of us are basically coming from, being a bit more on the technical sciencey side. So so in your discipline of field, what are you doing differently, and what do you feel are you doing better actually than what's state of the art in digital research professionals or the computational science field? Eamon, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, I hesitate, of course, because I think ultimately, when we say that we're doing it better, I certainly don't mean that there's everything is perfect, and in fact, far from it. So I might just focus on two things. They don't immediately translate into effective knowledge exchange, but they can really help underwrite it. So the first one is, I think in the arts and humanities, there is not just an awareness of the value of custodians of information or custodians of process, for example, libraries, galleries, museums, and so on. It's actually somehow embedded into the fabric of the disciplines that make up the arts and humanities, because most research within that context does not move forward unless a group of people take responsibility for a shared body of knowledge. It doesn't have to be centralized in the British Library or the British Museum, far from it, but it is a working assumption of most people in the field that their livelihood and their knowledge depends on the work of other people, and that's a really, really important value. I think scientists, and especially collaborative scientists, understand the value of that when you have gigantic international partnerships. But sometimes I think certainly we can, in the arts and humanities, really illustrate like how things don't move forward unless we take responsibility for things on the order of hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that has connotations for community building. It has connotations where people come together to discuss the work that they want to do in the future, the kinds of values that those institutions might have or steward, and some of the things that can go wrong in that context as well. So we also have plenty of examples of where knowledge is sort of fragmented or kept away from the people who could stand to benefit from it as well. So in that sense, it's not perfect. So that's a very high level one, but I do think getting people aligned on the values is a really important kind of lesson. So it means essentially to say to your community of practice or to your area of scientific investigation, yes, we do all these really cool things from the results point of view, but also what was the infrastructure that allowed that to happen in the first place, and not to have too short a memory when it comes to thinking about all the work that was done, maybe in terms of data sharing or open software development and stuff that got you to that point. I hope that's not too belabored as a point. it's also fun to read about things outside your own discipline too. So do read about the history of libraries and museums, because there's some good stuff in there. And then briefly, I would just say also, maybe a bit more specific when you're working in interdisciplinary contexts. Knowledge moves more or less quickly in some communities than in others. And things that seem fast moving to one group of people may seem very slow moving to another group, and vice versa. That has connotations for how opportunities, new developments, new techniques, new pieces of software move in those individual ecosystems. So if you are an interdisciplinary researcher, or you're an interdisciplinary community manager, or research technical professional, finding opportunities to take advantage of those differentials is really, really interesting, and actually really one of the most important things that you can do, which is to spot that information doesn't circulate in one place and rescue it from that into your community, and vice versa. Figure out ways that your own community, for example, might be moving in a particular direction, and leverage that to attract interest from another group of people who want things to move more quickly. Not that quick is the only way to do things, but does that make sense? So that's something that I think is special for interdisciplinary researchers or interdisciplinary research community managers. And I hope it's something that we do well in one of our initiatives at least. So there are two observations from our side.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a +1 from Nikki here, and I think even another +1 to Nikki's +1. They're saying, I think this is also very true for collections-based science, where curation is a big component. Yeah, and I would add so that collaboration becomes more and more crucial at the moment, where we have to think a lot about ethics as well, in what's happening currently in the world and with technology. Okay, yeah, a couple more +1s coming in there as well. Toby, what were your thoughts on this question? What are you doing differently in the carpentries? Or
Yeah, thanks, Marion. And I share Eamon's discomfort with the idea of pronouncing that we do anything better than anybody else. But I won't ever pass up an opportunity to plug things, and I hope that the things that I'm about to plug will be helpful to the folks here on the call. The Carpentries is really kind of founded on this recognition that there are a lot of people working in kind of the academic system in particular who are required to teach things either formally or informally as part of their job, but very often have received no training in how to do that effectively. And so one of the kind of central things, probably the most central thing underpinning all of the impact that the Carpentries community has around the world is our instructor training program. Deb's mentioned it already. Thanks, Debs. And there's probably a few other certified Carpentries instructors on the call as well. It's a training program that's designed to teach them like good practices, I suppose, in how to teach effectively, and a method that people can employ for teaching effectively, based on research findings in educational psychology in terms of like how people learn things, and therefore what are the most effective methods that you can use to teach these things to people. And yeah, I mean, it really works. It fundamentally changed the way that I approach teaching when I became an instructor. And I see that effect in a lot of other people out there in the community as well when they take the instructor training. We also these days do a lesson development training that's aiming to achieve the same thing, but for people who are going to be writing their own lessons as well as delivering them to people. And I really believe that those are some things that we're doing very well, and that can have a big impact. And yeah, I mean, I shared a link already in the chat to the Carpentries website where you can learn more about both of those things. I think as well, another aspect of what we're doing well is in that reflected in that open source nature of the lessons that I mentioned in my introduction. You know, I think we've achieved something quite remarkable by managing to engage a truly global community in the development and in the maintenance of these lessons and in the delivery of them in workshops as well. I think too often the model that people employ for training is they write their own material, they teach it to people, and then they throw those materials away, or they maybe come back to them next year, but they very rarely share them with somebody else to use. And what we've managed to do is get a huge community of people to work on these materials together and to deliver them within their own communities. And we also openly license those materials. Everything in the carpentry's lessons is published under what's called the Creative Commons Attribution License, which means that anybody can take them and reuse them and adapt them and so on, however they like, as long as they give credit to the source where they got the materials from in the first place. And that, I think, is a really great way to encourage this kind of knowledge sharing as well, and helps us make sure that our lessons are as accessible to as wide an audience as possible. So yeah, probably had more to talk about on this as well, but that'll do for now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely a good point that having the access to the carpentry's lesson does make a big difference. And I'm seeing that in other parts, in outreach, for example, as well, that people are kind of stopped if there's not the material and they don't have the time to develop it. And it's always easier to not start from a blank page. Even if you disagree with something or you don't like how this is done, it's easier to adapt something that's already there than to start from scratch. Okay, let's go to the next question, and that one is around what you already mentioned. Well, that we've talked a lot about communities, and so and part of that is that you have good practices in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and you should have this in all of your activities and all of your outreach and knowledge sharing, also to make it really effective. So what do you think are the most critical aspects of this that still need to be addressed across the community, apart from everything that's already done? Toby, would you like to start on that one again?
Yeah, you've heard quite a lot from me already, so I'll try to keep this briefer than my other answers. I do think we're doing some things fairly well. I still see a real need for greater effort in accessibility, and in particular web accessibility. Working on things like alternative text descriptions for images that are included in teaching materials is going to be really important, because often those figures, those diagrams and so on serve a really important purpose in terms of communicating the information that you're trying to in a given lesson or a given kind of knowledge sharing resource in general. As well, I think there's a tendency for people who are writing these materials to make analogies, metaphors, and so on to things that are perhaps too culturally specific to their environment and won't necessarily cross borders particularly well. Greg Wilson, who is the co-founder of Software Carpentry, tells a great story about how one day he got an email from somebody in Brazil telling him that they really liked the materials but didn't understand any of the examples because they were all about ice hockey and other Canadian things. And that led to like a pretty significant rewrite of the Software Carpentry materials. I see often lessons and other kinds of materials that could do with that kind of perspective as well. And then I think I will mention, as another thing to plug, a resource that the Carpentries published a few years ago now called the Toolkit of Ideas, which I'll drop a link to in the chat in a moment, that provides a whole load of things that you can do when you're organizing a workshop and when you're delivering it and so on, to make sure that it is as inclusive and accessible and equitable as possible. And then the last thing, which hopefully will make it a good opportunity for you to hand over to Debs, I think that it's really important as well to meet people where they are as well, not rely on people finding you and arriving knowing all the things that they need to and so on, but instead really find out who the people are out there that you want to reach out to, that you want to engage with your activities, and then, you know, make it as easy as possible for them to find you or for you to find them and so on, and to get them involved. Oh, thanks. Debs is doing an amazing job of dropping links in the chat.
Thank you. And Toby has already made the transition to Debs.
Only he made that transition after taking 3 of my points.
Do you have anything else you would like to add?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go off for the next 7 minutes like Toby. I think we've done a fair job at focusing on representation, but something that we could do better is actually the redistribution of opportunities. So it's no longer enough for people from underrepresented groups to participate, but we have to shift the focus to leadership. And I find in a lot of spaces that these underrepresented individuals end up solving problems that are not their own, because they just meet a project where the project is currently and they just go with the flow, as opposed to where they would identify a problem and attempt to solve that problem. And this actually brings out more context-aware solutions. So there's a saying, and I'm going to say this in Nigerian pidgin, now who wear the shoe, know where they pin them. This actually means that the person wearing the footwear knows exactly where it hurts the most. And so this is the idea that I've seen. And quick plug for pre-seeds, this is what we're doing differently, kind of to go back to the previous question. This is what we're doing differently. We had a survey before we started developing the materials for pre-seeds to kind of meet people where they are, like Toby said, to ascertain what exactly makes people feel like they are underrepresented in research, what kind of approaches to learning would they prefer, and based on the feedback from that survey, we're developing these materials together with the people who need it the most, so that we're actually creating a solution that works. It makes me think about carpentries offline. This is a carpentries project that's led by Yanetta Stein, good friend of mine. It's creating the carpentries materials, but for people in low resource settings who don't have access to the internet. A solution like that could only come from Yanetta, because Yanetta has lived the experience of not having access to the internet. And I think there's also power in having local chapters for larger organizations. So there's the RSC Society in the UK, but how about RSC Nigeria? I swear I'm not thinking of starting that. There's also Chaos Africa, which is like the African arm of the Chaos Project. There's Our Ladies, there's Our Ladies in Abuja, in Gaborone, in different parts. And something else I think holds real power is translation. So localizing materials that exist in the standard English language and making them into other languages. For instance, I had a call recently with someone, a prominent voice in the Latin American open science space. And she said that she definitely sees the usefulness in a project like Pre-Seeds, because she's from Latin America and she's volunteering now to try and translate Pre-Seeds into Spanish so it benefits them more. And this is how we intentionally democratize knowledge for these groups when we talk about EDI. And I think a final thing would be to plug another kind of accessibility. We have to go beyond physical inclusion, which is super important, to more contextual and digital accessibility. So asynchronous participation, because not everyone can afford to fly to Berlin for a conference, captioned content for people with visual or auditory impairments, and low bandwidth formats. I love when I go to a African carpentry school and everyone's video is turned off, because that's how it should be, to make sure that everyone can actually hear. There's also finally recognizing non-traditional expertise. I bring this in because we're talking a bit about academia and how we recognize publications and citations, but what about community-based experiences? What about applied experiences beyond the publications? And so, yeah, this was that up to 7 minutes, or should I keep talking?
Well, we probably could have a whole session on this topic alone. Maybe that's for the next research software camp. Yeah, so this shows that there's a lot more to do. And what I really like about things like the collaboration workshop is that on things like the discussion sessions and the hack day, and so these things are tackled. So the carpentries offline was one of these things that came up in a discussion session, and that Janetta then took forward on the SSI collaboration workshop hack day, and now it's reality. So these things, yeah, need the space and need the people taking it forward. Okay, I feel a bit bad to change topic now, because I feel we've still just scratched the surface on this question. But I will first of all, so we're having another half hour, and I would really like the audience to also ask questions and have the opportunity to basically get out of this great panel and their experience, and so what they want to know. So please use the Q&A to do that. We've got a couple of other questions on our list here. So I will continue with them until we will get a couple of other questions in the Q&A, and also we can go back to our prepared questions. I think okay, I was going to skip a question, but I won't, because 3 people of you said that you would like to answer this question. So looking to the future, what do you see as the skills that are in most need across the community? And Kirsty, do you want to start off this one?
I was forgetting what I was going to say to this one. I think it's not so much necessarily about skills for me, but it's more about making sure that the skills that people have are valued and recognized. Because I think within the community we have these skills, we're doing an okay job, but it's more the fact that a lot of these efforts are squeezed into people's spare time, or they don't end up in people's promotion forms, and that's the real big change that I would like to see. So I would like to see these skills valued more, rather than we need more skills. There's training out there and the support, and I mean, particularly in this community, it's a lovely collaborative community. Every time I've asked for help, people have taken time, even people I don't know have taken the time out to help me. So, but they don't get any recognition for doing that, and that's, I think, a lot of the stumbling blocks. So I would like to see better recognition of how important this is. How can we quantify this? How can we show the effect that this is having? And can people be valued for that? And that's the kind of, I think, the stumbling block, because a lot of the skills are kind of quite generic soft skills, good at speaking to people, good at translating, like good at making information easily accessible, good kind of being quite careful with how you speak or how you write. I think we as a community have those skills, or they're relatively easy to learn, but I don't feel there's much incentive really to learn them at the moment. That's my little soapbox. Let's see if anyone agrees.
Thank you. Toby, what do you think?
A few things, I guess. I think that it's becoming increasingly important for folks working in research software to have the skills needed to take over responsibility for a code base that's been written by somebody else. Software has become more and more important for research in the recent couple of decades, I guess, in particular. What we're seeing more and more is these large suites of research software that have existed for a while, and that at some point somebody other than the person who wrote them in the first place is going to need to take primary responsibility for. And so I see that. And then the other thing that I guess we're all kind of still waiting to see how it shakes out is what impacts generative AI is going to have on research software development and maintenance as well. I would say we're still a little bit too early to say, because feels like we're still in the middle of a hype cycle to me. But what I am certain about at this point is that it's not a technology that's going away altogether. And so I think it's really important for research software engineers to be thinking about what that means in terms of their skill set, and how much more important it's going to be able to critically evaluate code that is written by somebody else or something else in the case of these tools, and also what we need to be able to do and what we want to advocate for in the wider research community in terms of the value of the human skills around research software engineering as well.
Thanks, Toby. Emma, did you want to reply to that?
It was more like a bit to Toby, a bit to Kirsty, really. I don't think I agree with you, Kirsty, actually, because I mean, what I generally see now, and I'm not speaking about us here as people that are more senior in research, but people coming through, like universities coming into jobs. And I hear this a lot from employers, like government employers and different sectors than academia, that they're finding particularly graduates have fantastic technical skills now, but actually the other side of it, the sort of socio-technical side, they're very much lacking. And actually, so we at Turing have started to try and move our training, particularly for PhD students, into the sort of, let's learn how to collaborate. Let's learn how to make your research open. I definitely think open research skills, even though there is lots of training out there, is something that people generally lack, and they kind of don't really understand the sort of spectrum of skills that you really need to make your research reproducible is kind of another thing. And it's important also to train people to be trainers, like Toby is doing. I think that's a really important skill as well, that a lot of people are generally lacking. We kind of get dumped in there and said, you go and do this training course, but actually a lot of times we don't really get to learn how to be a teacher, a trainer, that sort of thing. So yeah, so I do think that kind of that sort of soft skill side, there isn't actually that much training around for it. And I think some people do. I think Kirsty is one of them, is very good at it and can learn it easy. But there are lots of people who find that side of collaboration, and particularly like interdisciplinary working, which often is our kind of area of working, they do find that quite difficult. And actually, so if we want to build teams that are truly collaborative, we do need to actually focus on teaching people those skills. So it might be like translating things into different sort of technical levels is something that I generally train people in and what else, all these things that we're talking about, communication platforms and all that kind of stuff, isn't generally taught very much in my experience. Sorry to disagree with you, Kirsty. I don't think I usually disagree with you.
Thank you. Debs, do you want to also give your view?
No, I feel like I'm muting to disagree with everyone. But I do agree. It's as you say, Marion, we're quite mature in the technical skills, but I agree that we can do a lot more when it comes to the soft skills. So beyond the coding, we could do better with infrastructure skills like facilitation, community management, inclusive communication. It seems like a small thing. Project management, these little foxes, they spoil the vine, and I think we can do a lot better. Yes, we have the CSCCE. I will not even attempt to say the full meaning of CSCCE. I will just leave the link in the chat. We have them doing a lot of this capacity building when it comes to soft skills. But yeah, we definitely can use more training in that regard. I think something else that holds special importance is the ethical and social awareness kind of aspects of it. And I think Kirsty will agree with this, understanding how our research software actually impacts equity, accessibility, and even environmental sustainability. These are important things. And for the larger global context of things like grant writing and collaborative skills are very important and crucial to the sustainability of open source work. I think it should use a bit more attention than it's already getting. And finally, of course, I'm going to say we need to get better at supporting marginalized groups.
Thank you. We've got our first question in the Q&A. Yay. Nikki is asking, often the concepts we value exist but are named differently in different communities. So translation is important. Would it help to share these mappings and if so, how? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. And if you want to raise your hands, if you feel you want to answer that question.
Can you just say it again, Marianne, because you kind of cut out in a bit in the
Oh,
middle.
sorry. Yeah, often the concepts we value exist, but are named differently in different communities. So translation is important. Would it help to share these mappings and translations? And if so, how? Kirsty.
So just in my opinion, I think it can help. I also think sometimes it's also just good to not get hung up on it. You see what I mean? If you're in a community that uses, like we use outreach for, like as Emma's example, he uses outreach, what we call widening participation, they're calling outreach. They're just different terms. We both understand the concept. So occasionally I find myself in meetings where we're just a bit bogged down with terminology and things like that. And actually, rather than having to kind of convert people to your technology, go with the technology that the community that you're working with is using, even if it kind of makes you itch because you think that's wrong. Like, unless there's a particular reason that you feel that you need to correct it. I sometimes think that what can really help is just to take a step back and think of the bigger picture. And is this really is this blocking your work? If it is, then yeah, we can map and things like that. But actually, is it better to just kind of go with the flow of the community you're working with and accept that, and then at least even though you're using different words, you have a common understanding, which is kind of what's the part that's important.
Thank you. Eamon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, briefly. So I think this is something that we hit up against a lot, and I like Kirsty. I think sometimes aiming to be exhaustive in terms of a glossary or a mapping or something like that can really slow down progress, and it can sometimes lead to a sort of false sense of having achieved something, because sometimes those taxonomies and vocabularies are actually quite unstable even within the communities that we're trying to serve. Having said that, I also think that talking openly about what we call things is better than sort of pretending there isn't a problem. I think as a sort of complementary solution, I do sometimes experiment a little bit with this, but it's hard to do online unless you've got people kind of face to face, is just kind of alternative ways of convening people around the things that they want to do. So like just mapping things, visual stuff, serious play, sometimes called, like I'm thinking of a specific example using a specific kind of toy, but you can imagine non-verbal ways of articulating what, or eliciting or drawing out from your community what they want to achieve, which don't necessarily involve a shared terminology, but bring people together and saying, well, we would like the world to look like this. We would like people to interact with each other in this way, and we would like them to relate to their tools in this other way. Oh, and then that becomes an opportunity to build consensus around the relationships that you want to build in terms of their structure. And then people can say, well, I recognize that as open science. And then other people will say, oh, I recognize that as, running a library or something like that. I'm being a bit silly, but there are ways to get around this terminology problem with certain kinds of intentional facilitation that don't start with the concepts, or rather that don't start with the words, but try to draw out the concepts through sort of action or play or coordination in a nonverbal way. So it's just another kind of tool in the toolbox.
Before I come to Emma, I just want to add a thought on this, because I've had conversations with people from very different backgrounds, which were a bit around working with RSEs or other people. And one was from someone from the arts and humanities community, and the other one was a particle physicist, but both had these thinking that it's so much easier and more effective to work with an RSE who is from that community, because they just understand and they just do the thing. And the particle physicist said, oh yeah, we needed like months until we had that common understanding and common vocabulary so that we could make good progress. So, and that then asked the questions, okay, is that true, or is it just basically in people's heads? So is there a resistance against using different words or doing things differently? Or is it really the fact that we should have research software engineers from the field, working in the field to be more effective? Yeah, but Emma, I'll let you speak.
Thanks, Marion. So yeah, I think just from working in the Turing Way community, which is a very global community, we've had the experience that it isn't just words, so it isn't just the terminology. It's the actual concepts sometimes that can't translate between particularly different world regions. So different examples of this are from my colleague Batul, who works in the Middle East. Like when she started interacting with community members in her region, open science as a thing just wasn't a concept. Like it just didn't exist. It's very like global north, very Eurocentric kind of thing. And actually it just wasn't something that people understood. They didn't have an Arabic word for it at all. You just had to try and translate the sort of different parts of it into Arabic. But things like the fair data principles, actually, when you start looking at that in different countries, it just some parts of that just could never actually be adopted in certain countries because of their legal setups, their sort of government setups. So you've got to kind of think when you're working in these very global communities, actually, it's not just translating the actual word itself to understand the sort of terminology. It might be that actually the concept that you're trying to, and I have to say, I talk a lot about the fair data principles and implementing them, and there you just have to understand that actually there needs to be a lot more, I don't know what the word is, flexibility, I suppose. You can't just say, yes, you should all be doing this, you should all.
Am I just cut out for me or for everyone?
Oh, did he lose me?
Yes, so just after flexibility.
Well, that was it really. There needs to be a lot more flexibility, a lot more awareness. I think that, different parts of the world, different communities, have different experiences. They have different barriers that are put in place. And it's in terms of terminology, but the actual concepts as well themselves sometimes can't be adopted in different places.
Thank you. I hope that opened the question, answered the question. Nikki, if you want to ask a follow-up question, you can just put it in the chat as well. And yeah, we're rapidly approaching the end of the session. Oh, Nikki says thanks. So if anyone has any more questions, please put them in the Q&A now, because this is your chance to have them answered here. And I will just look quickly through the questions we have. Does anyone of the panel have a favorite question they really wanted to talk about in those that we haven't covered yet? Amen.
Really quick one. It was I'll ask the question and answer it. It's just about getting started as an early career person if you're interested in this area. I mean, it's just one suggestion. It's something that I ended up doing not quite deliberately, just something that fell naturally out of the project that one of the projects I'm responsible for. And it's just build a newsletter, a simple email newsletter, pick the frequency, send it to the kind of smallest group of people that you can think of that has a common interest. It might be across disciplinary lines. It might be just because you like to use the same tool. And use that as an opportunity to practice filtering out the signal from the noise, because you probably, if you're already engaged, you're already receiving other newsletters, you're probably receiving project updates from other projects. If you're not, this is another good way to get started. And just ask yourself what, of all the things that are out there, what are the 4 or 5 most important things a group of people should need to know in a given frequency, whether it's a month or a quarter, or even just informally. It's a really nice, concrete way of sharing information, but also to get you kind of in the mood for thinking about what's important, what's not important, figuring out how to summarize stuff. Making sure that stuff gets prioritized even within a newsletter. These are all really good concrete tasks that you need to be able to do as a community, as somebody facilitating knowledge exchange, and emails are more or less free. So I would encourage people to use the tools that they have to hand to make that work.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Emma.
So my question very much relates to Eamon's question, and it's really about doing these activities alongside your day job without the proper recognition or time allocation. I think we need to change that, because we're all here working as professionals, knowledge exchange professionals, as part of our job. Maybe we've carved out a percentage of our job as part of our other job, or we actually do focus as this kind of knowledge exchange professional as our actual career. And at the moment, there isn't, like Kirsty spoke earlier, there isn't really recognition for a lot of people's work that they do in these roles. They do often do them as add-ons to their job, as really kind community members that volunteer to do this kind of work. And actually, I do think we need to move away from that. We need to understand that these activities are fundamental to research, and people need to be paid properly and recognised for the work that they do in this particular area. I very much am advocating for professionalising these roles, particularly research community managers, and understanding how you get to these roles. Like Eamon was saying, early career researchers, you can start doing newsletters, you can start joining committees, you can start training to be a trainer, these sorts of things. But it's still very unclear what people's career pathways are like within these types of roles within our community. So I would love to see there more clarity over sort of career pathways and recognition for these professions.
Thank you. Kirsty, do you want to follow up from that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was more kind of going back to Eamon's part about getting started in this, because I think it's a really nice topic to finish on. So when I first started doing public engagement, I knew I wanted to do public engagement, get my message out, all that kind of stuff. And I asked for advice about just how to get started, because it seemed like there was loads of really well established projects, and I didn't have the time or the skills or the experience to create my own project. So it felt like it was a bit of a barrier. Like the people that were doing it already had quite a lot of skills and experience, but for me it felt like this really big jump. And I think it's potentially true with lots of the knowledge exchange work. And the advice I got was to just, as much as possible, try everything. And that can involve just helping someone, an event, you see a workshop you think is interesting, maybe ask if you can help, not help facilitate, but just help as a volunteer. You see a newsletter you like, ask if you can help kind of get some information for it, things like that. So you don't, as a very first step, you don't have to take responsibility for something. You can just ask your manager if you can have a little bit of time to help with this project that you like. Ask the people that's running the project if you can get, and that's a really good way of getting a taster of lots of different types of projects, lots of different types of public engagement, or lots of different types of knowledge exchange. So you can kind of put yourself out there a little bit and offer to help. And that gives you a little bit of experience, and also gives you the experience of deciding which bits you like, which bits you don't like. Probably nobody's an expert in everything. You probably won't be an expert in all the different areas across this, but it does give you experience. It's like a kind of training session, isn't it? It gives you experience of lots of different things. And it's a bit awkward. You have to kind of go and ask, but most people are really happy to have an extra helper for various bits and pieces. And I think that's quite a low burden way of getting a feel for lots of different activities, and then you start to see what's involved in it, and then you start to see what you like, and then you can start to develop your own things from that. And I think that kind of just informal going to speak to people and saying you'd really like to work in this area, you'd like more experience in this area, is a really good way to do it. Then narrow it down. Don't try and do everything at a high, because you'll just drive yourself just with too much. But just try everything as a taster. Offer to volunteer, offer to help, and then use that to decide what you like. I think is a really nice way to do it.
Thank you. So in the last 5 minutes, I just like to go around the panelists one last time and ask you whether there's one key takeaway message you would like to give to the participants, or one more thing that you didn't have the chance to say in the past 1.5 hours or so. And yeah, we've just 5 minutes, so you have less than a minute per person for for each of this. Because you're first on my screen, Emma, would you like to start, or do you need a moment longer to consider?
I think I probably said mine, which is that I'd really like to see better recognition of like wider outputs, wider things that we do. And I think Kirsty also talked earlier about impact. Like, we don't track the impact of knowledge exchange activities very well. So having better recognition of things other than books and journal articles within research would actually really help to actually move that recognition for the wider outputs. And I'd like to highlight the Hidden Ref campaign, which is trying to kind of do that exactly. So, yeah.
Thank you. Toby, you want to go next?
Thanks. Yeah, it's just to follow up from what Emma has been saying. I'd like to shout out the SSI's fellowship program in this regard. I think one thing that can help with gaining more recognition for these kinds of activities is things like certifications and fellowships and so on that promote these activities and the kinds of skills that we've been talking about here. If you can get that sort of thing, it really can increase the perceived value of these things for employers, for supervisors, and so on. So I'd strongly recommend that folks check that out if they haven't done so already. And I've just dropped the link in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. Eamon, are you?
Yeah, a very quick one. It was mentioned very briefly by Toby, but I want to underline it. The carpentry is strong because it's evidence-based. It draws on, professional, high-quality, peer-reviewed evidence about how learning works, and in some cases how community works as well. And so it is tempting sometimes to bring our kind of anecdotal or vibes-based approach to how we want to run our community. I think that's really a great place to get started. But it sometimes can reproduce strategies or tactics for engaging people that don't work. So it's always a challenge to engage with the literature, but we are all researchers at the end of the day, and so I would encourage you to try and find some underpinning literature that informs or justifies your approach to knowledge exchange, if possible, and if not, create it.
Yeah. Yes. Great point. Steps, what's your last point?
Yeah, to follow up on the idea of create it, if you've identified a gap or something that needs to be done, don't be afraid, pitch it, go out there and build it. If you have to build it with your two sisters and your best friend from high school, go ahead and start, and you might just start a big wave of something really great and useful. And on the flip side, if you're in a more privileged position, please do your best to actually support these younger initiatives, whether it's as easy as reposting their stuff on social media, giving them platforms to speak, citing them. Just do what you can.
Thank you. Kirsty.
So I think it's probably come through from the panel, but this is actually, it's a lovely area to work in. Like I moan about it, but actually it's a really, really nice area to work in. It's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying. We don't track impact very well, but we see it with our own eyes that we're making a difference. It's very positive, and like I'm so happy I found a niche within research where I'm helping research, but not necessarily being a researcher, because that just totally suits me. And I'm so excited to see like the next generation of people come through with these kind of roles, because it's an absolute honor to work in a role like this. It's lovely. So yeah, and it's nice that we can moan, but also we should remember that it's actually loads of fun.
Yeah, definitely. I can just underline that. I will also post again something in our cake project we've currently called Open for Knowledge Exchange Fellows, which is a bit similar to the SSI Fellowship Program, where you get some money and some to do your own knowledge exchange project, as well as a call for people to ask for money for placements and internships. And so please have a look at that if you've got interest in this. So, and we're up on the half hour. So thank you very much to the panel. So this has been really, really great, and so much to think about, and so much. So I've learned a lot, and I think we could have talked for another hour, so probably. So yeah, thank you very much also to Cairo and the SSI for hosting this.